Welcome to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive with Dr. Rebecca Risk. Do you ever feel that even though nothing seems seriously wrong and you pass all the medical tests, that you still feel that your health, pain, and fatigue are completely out of control? It doesn't have to be that way. Listen to the tips and suggestions given on our program today and take back control of your health. Now, here is Dr. Rebecca Risk.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Falling Through the Cracks. Today, we're welcoming Valter Longo, who is the director of the Longevity Institute at USC in Los Angeles. He received the 2010 Nathan Schock Lecture Award from the National Institute on Aging, and today we are discussing his book, The Longevity Diet. Valter, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I've been working on aging and age-related diseases for almost 30 years. And so once we finished our clinical trial last year on this fasting mimicking diet and obtained very positive results, I thought that there was the time to let everybody else know what we've been doing and how it can be used to prevent diseases but also treat diseases.
Perfect. So, how did you get involved in studying all of this and doing this?
I actually started working on aging in my second year of college, and I always thought that there was a great scientific challenge, but at the same time it was a great medical challenge, or at least a medical solution, meaning that it was pretty obvious to me even when I was 19 that most major diseases were age-related. And yet, at least at the time, nobody was working on aging. And I just thought that there was a great unexplored opportunity. And then that's all I've done since then.
So can you explain to us what aging is?
Yeah, your voice disappeared for about 5 seconds.
Oh, sorry. Can you explain to us what aging is?
Yeah, so aging is basically the time-dependent changes that occur in a variety of cells and systems, and usually they're accompanied by dysfunction. So a better word is senescence. We use the word aging. Aging usually can be also viewed as a positive word. Some things that age you get better, but senescence is a better word, but referring to the age-dependent changes that usually come with dysfunction. And the dysfunction is caused by, let's say, DNA damage to proteins, and damage to lipids, etc., inside of a cell and also outside of a cell that eventually make these cells and systems less functional.
So, I mean, we all know about aging. We age, and I mean, most people probably aren't thinking about DNA damage or thinking about how they feel. But, is that something that we can change?
It's something we can certainly change the aging to the point that we can minimize its effects on dysfunction and disease, right? So, for example, we've been following this population in Ecuador, human population that lacks the growth hormone receptor. And we have known for decades that similar mutation in mice causes a 50% lifespan extension and also a major decrease in diseases. And we've shown in these people that they rarely develop cancer, rarely develop diabetes. Cognitively, they're protected. They seem to have a more youthful brain compared to the people that are age matched and sex matched, and they live in the same houses, right? So clearly, the mouse data, the monkey data, the human data now suggest that the aging can be delayed so that a person can be maintained in a functional state long enough, until they die, essentially. And, for example, I was following Emma Morano, the oldest person in the world, up to this last year, where when she died at 117 years of age. And Emma was still eating on her own. She really didn't have any diseases. Her memory was good. So up to 117, she managed to live a pretty healthy life. And this is what I call juventology. a term that I coined to sort of try to change the idea of gerontology. So learning and studying aging, I thought it's more important to learning and studying how to stay young, and that's really what we've been focusing on.
So when you're following somebody like her, living to 117, what are you finding that people who are living that long have in common?
Well, if you look at people that have extreme longevities, you're going to find all kinds of stories, particularly because many of the ones that get to such an extreme longevity, they have the genetic background to be an exception. But if you look around the world, whether it's Okinawa or Sardinia, Italy, or Loma Linda, California, all the zones that have extreme longevity, meaning that you have they either have a longer lifespan than everybody else, or they're able to get to 100 years of age more than everybody else. Then you see the same diet over and over, and also somewhat the same exercise pattern. So they usually have a low-protein diet. They're vegan, pescatarian, or vegan most of the time. They might eat meat once a week. They might have some eggs once in a while. They usually eat the same thing over and over, and they're well nourished, right? So they tend to know what to eat, and they tend to carry the tradition of having a complete diet, but fairly limited in the number of food types that they eat. They also usually exercise, but not in the sense that we think about. They exercise naturally, meaning they may walk, 10 miles a day, or do similar activities, and this is very common for almost everybody that I visited, and also, if you look at what's being reported on these extreme longevity zones, it's consistent with this behavior.
So, living for a long time, especially in good health, is what most people are striving for, and I think a lot of people are afraid of, developing dementia or cancer, and especially having to be reliant on somebody around them. But, for help, whether it's physical help or mental help. And, if you're talking to somebody who's 117 years old and she's still living on her own, I think that's pretty amazing and encouraging that this is something that we can all achieve.
Yeah, consider that she lived completely on her own until I think 110 or something like that, 107. And then she still lived in her apartment, but then she will have, one person pretty much always with her. So in the last 10 years, that was the situation. But yeah, I think that there's, even 108, that is remarkable, and that is, of course, in her case, associated with the good genes, but also in most cases associated with a combination of factors. And for example, what we observed, and we see it also in the field, is that people that have a low protein diet up to age 65, they did very well. But then if you look at people reporting having a very low protein diet when they're 75, 80, 90, they don't do so well, right? So, so we think that that's a frailty component, meaning that once you get to a certain age, having a little bit higher protein intake, a little bit higher variety, maybe more meat added to the diet, or certainly more eggs and certain yogurts and maybe goat milk. These seem to be positive factors, and we think that a lot of the centenarians get that from oftentimes moving in with their sons and daughters. They have a worse diet, but it's a worse diet that helps them with the frailty component. So at 85 years of age, you're less concerned about cancer and more concerned about dying of pneumonia, for example. So that's probably, we think that's probably why a lot of these populations are so successful. They sort of have different phases of nutrition throughout life.
So, I mean, there's a lot of talk about diet in this day and age, and there's obvious reasons that our society in North America is going in a very wrong direction when it comes to diet. I mean, I have this conversation pretty much every week about, we're eating too much of stuff and not enough of the others. And there's a lot of diets out there that are geared towards, people's health problems. My consensus is that we're just doing something very wrong, and we're kind of missing the boat on eating real food. And you're saying to eat more vegan, and there's the paleo side as well. So what is your opinion on that?
Well, my opinion is that first of all, we allowed almost anybody to be an expert on diet, and that's a problem. And you can see how it would be a problem in any field, right? If you sort of allowed anybody to fly a plane or anybody to do surgery, and this is the same way. People underestimate how complex the biochemistry that depends on the diet is, and also how complex the diet composition is. So, the paleo diet, I think the people are confusing short-term effects and maybe effects on one thing with long-term effects on the aging process, right? So, in the end, let's say there's something, if you had a paleo, let's say a high-protein, high-meat diet that makes your cholesterol be lower, it may be completely irrelevant if that same diet increases your chances of developing cancer by threefold and Alzheimer by twofold, right? So now you have a little bit less cholesterol, you may have lost some weight, and then you might have, a much higher chance of developing all kinds of problems later on. So that's that's been the problem, I think, at having so many people having their opinion. And also on top of that, also many of the experts having opinion based on one disease at a time without the looking at the longevity component. So if you look at if you say this is a diet great for this, for cancer or for cardiovascular disease, we have to move away from that. Now you can do that for somebody that has a specific problem. So I say if somebody is at 3 or 4 different cancers in the family, and let's say those cancers are dependent on, or alcohol is a risk factor for them, then you certainly want to tell that person, stay away from alcohol. But in general, alcohol extends your life. It doesn't decrease, right? So this is one example, but I could give you many. Caffeine is another one, and on and on and on. You have to be able to have a much more sophisticated look at these diets, and also you have to go with data, right? So in my book, I talk about 5 pillars, and for example, if you look at the paleo diet, and 5 pillars are epidemiological studies, clinical studies, basic research focused on longevity, centenarian studies, and studies of complex systems. So if you look at the paleo diet and you go through these different disciplines, you'll see there's very little support for the paleo diet in any of this, right? So then you have to say, sure, it could be that maybe it turns out that a very specific paleo diet is very positive for you, but the data is just not there. Do you really want to take your chances on it compared to a pescatarian diet, a low-protein pescatarian diet, for which there is overwhelming evidence for being very beneficial, right? So, so that's the type of reasoning that goes into deciding diets. And, of course, there's the type of reasoning that you can have only, if you've been doing this for a long time, and if you, like me, have focused on biochemistry and pathology.
So I've interviewed a lot of people on the show, and some with paleo diet, and some people do get good results, and I've seen the data in your direction as well, and sometimes I wonder if it's that people are changing their diet, and that's why they're feeling better. They're taking out all the sugars and all the other stuff that they're eating, and it's hard to gauge. And I know with paleo sometimes people go overboard with the protein, or really, and I think you have in your book how much protein we're supposed to consume, but we really aren't supposed to be eating, this huge steak on our plate. It's a balance with everything else, and according to who we are as well.
Yes, absolutely. So I think in most cases, you change your diet. Let's say you can cut your carbs or you can cut your fats and some carbs. If you make drastic changes to your diet and you just eat less, you're going to see benefits. Now, the question is, A, how do you get the benefits that are overall positive and not just temporary of one kind? And B, can you in fact maintain this diet for a long time? And so those are the things that are very important. So you can get lower weight in many different ways, but which one is the healthy way, and which one is a healthy way that you can maintain for the rest of your life? Also, because you're enjoying what you're eating. So a lot of people, for example, attack carbs, but carbs, if you look around the world, are by overwhelmingly the number one type of micronutrient, right? So in most diets for people that have record longevity, they eat mostly carb, but they don't eat a lot of starches. They don't eat a lot of sugar. So people, again, because there's so many people that are not experts in this field, they tend to put carbs all in the same category and are unable to distinguish, let's say, legumes and vegetables, which can have a lot of carbs. So most of the carbs should come from legumes and vegetables. And people, a lot of times, are even surprised that they have carbs in it. And and very little carbs should come from sugar, and some carbs should come from starches, because unless you're gluten intolerant, etc. Because why is that? Because starches allow people to enjoy the food. So, for example, a typical old Italian dish would be having maybe a little bit, very little pasta, lots of vegetables and legumes. Right? That was the typical Southern Italian dish up to 50 years ago. Now, almost every place you go to, you have a dish covered with starches, covered with pasta. Well, now we went from something very good to something very bad, right? And that's where a lot of the confusion comes in. Same thing for fats, right? The people confuse high fat with high bad fat diet, and so high fat diet is having about 30% of your calories coming from fat is actually very good.
I'm going to interrupt you just so that we can take a break. We'll talk about this more when we get back. We're talking today with Valter Longo, and we're discussing his book, The Longevity Diet, and we'll be back shortly.
Your life, your health, your network. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
The largest syndicated alternative health talk program has come to the Voice America Network. The Dr. Bob Martin Show is the program that will answer your health questions and help you to heal your own body of many different ailments. Each week, you'll hear the answers that Dr. Bob gives to his callers that help them to be their own doctor most of the time. We'll also discuss developments on the healthcare front and what you need to do to keep your body in top form. The Dr. Bob Martin Show airs Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. Eastern, 6 a.m. Pacific on Voice America Health and Wellness.
The Voice America Live Events channel is here now to showcase your corporate, individual, or organization's live event. Visit voiceamerica.com/live events to see all of our past live events and find out more. Whether it's a multi-day conference, special speaker, or single-day event, we've got everything to make your event a success. We can do a few hours or a few days. For more information about taking your event to the next level, call Jeff Spinard at 480-294-6417 or email info@voiceamerica.com. Again, that's Jeff Spinard at 480-294-6417 or send us an email to info@voiceamerica.com. Voice America is where you are and where you want to be. Join us around the globe as we broadcast live from some of the most interesting events available. Don't forget to view all our live events, including on-demand access to past events that you may have missed by visiting voiceamerica.com/live events.
Your life, your health, your network. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
are listening to Falling Through the Cracks with your host, Dr. Rebecca Risk. To reach the program today, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email directly to Dr. Risk. The email address is anantacalgary@gmail.com. Now, back to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today we're talking with Valter Longo. He is the author of The Longevity Diet. So, Valter, I just want to confirm something you said before the break. You were talking about carbs, which have definitely been demonized, in a lot of diets. And I think mainly because they might be done wrong or we've taken some things to the extreme. But what are healthy carbs that we can consume without hurting ourselves?
Yes, again, the legumes, so the beans, the peas, etc. They contain a lot of carbs, and so do vegetables. And so that those are the ones that you want to have, unless you have some allergy, of course. You want to have in high quantities in your diet. What you don't want to have is this old style of rice bowl or pasta bowl or bread, lots of bread, and those are really starches. They're sugar essentially, and they are converted into sugars very rapidly, and that's what where the confusion comes in, right? So we look at populations, including the U.S. population, where there's a lot of sugar, a lot of starch consumption, and of course that's bad. That's going to help obesity, insulin resistance, etc. And we mix that with a high carb diet of a good kind, where what the Okinawans used to have, and what the Southern Italians, etc. Where again you have maybe about 60% of the calories coming from carbohydrates, but there's certainly not a ton of starches and a ton of sugars.
So, and then for proteins, you're recommending a diet that's not very high in meat. So how does somebody figure out if they're having enough protein in their diet?
Yeah, so I think they have to do some investigation, let's say, at the very beginning, but then that's it. So, for example, a can of garbanzo beans contains about 30 grams of protein. So once you know that, and let's say that you are a person that is 100 pounds or 120 pounds, you need about 50 grams of protein a day, let's say 45, 50. So you know that contains 30. You have another 15 to go, and you just have to learn the 30, 40 foods that you always consume, how much protein do they have in them, and then once you know it, it's pretty straightforward. So let's say a filet of salmon may contain, 40 grams of protein or something like that, and or maybe even 50, depending on how large it is. So once you know that, then you understand that you need, to have so much of the 2 or 3 protein-rich ingredients to get to the required amount.
Well, your book had a calculation in there, and I haven't done that one, but I have done probably something very similar in the past, and it reduced my protein intake probably in half by doing that. And I think a lot of people think that, they need to eat protein, so they like it, so they add more. And what we don't realize is that we are eating too much of it, and we need to cut back on it, as well as other things. I think we overeat pretty much everything except our vegetables. But, it is something for us as a society to assess, along with all the other things that we're doing, that can be too much of anything.
Yes, protein, now, you hear it all the time, and now it became the new ingredient or macronutrient that everybody thinks is super healthy. And so I'm afraid that we're getting into another epidemic, if you will. And, we did it with the low fat, and that people then turn to sugars, right? And now we go to high protein, low carb, and that's going to create another problem. So I think, unfortunately, is that people have to understand that, again, there is some complexity. That doesn't mean that they have to handle the complexity. They just have to trust some experts that they can explain to them. For example, you have to have enough proteins, and but that is, in the book I talk about, let's say 30 grams of proteins together with muscle training can optimize the muscle synthesis. So if you have enough protein in a single meal and you combine it with muscle training, then you're probably going to have you're going to maintain a good muscle mass. Now, you might want to have some extra protein during the day, again, to get to the level that I mentioned earlier, but seems like 30, 35 grams in that one single meal is probably enough to maximize protein synthesis in the muscle. And so you don't need the amount of protein that most people eat.
So and with fats, of course, they were demonized a while ago, and then now we're realizing how important they are. So what's your recommendation with that?
Sorry, I didn't understand. What's my recommendation with
fats? Fat.
Oh, fat.
Yeah.
Fat, the recommendation is there should be about 30% of the calories, so much higher than most people consume, but not entering that high ketogenic level that some people are talking about, let's say 50%. Why is that? Well, because if you look at some of the large studies, for example, Astruc and others in Spain, they've looked at people consuming lots of olive oil every day and nuts, etc., and they did very well. But I also like the fact that if you go with 30% of fats, let's say from salmon, olive oil, nuts, it is very common. If you look around the world, some populations don't do it. For example, the Okinawans have historically a very low-fat diet, but some of the population do. The Greeks, the Italians. So it seems that it's enjoyable. It pushes you sufficiently into a ketogenic mode, but not so much that we maybe get surprises after somebody does it for 20 years. So 60, 30, 10, I think is a good way to go, with 30% of the calories being from fat, but the good fats, mostly plant-based or all plant-based, and maybe a little bit from fish, and that's it.
So you're saying that eating the fat can put you in a ketogenic state?
Yes. So now you're hearing a lot of this ketogenic diet, and the problem with that is that if you push yourself, let's say to 50, half of your calories coming from fat, now you're in a territory that is largely unexplored. Almost nobody around the world eats like that. Certainly nobody that has a long lifespan historically, right? So now you're pushing your body into a mode, into an unexplored territory, and that is the danger of it. It may be that you do very well with it, but you're really taking a big chance, and that's why I say much better to stick with what we see in population like the Greeks and the Italians, and maybe even some Costa Ricans. Keep the fat at about 30%, and you can do that just by eating a good amount of olive oil every day, and some nuts, and maybe salmon a couple of times a week.
So you spoke before the break about the 5 pillars of longevity. Can you just explain that a little more for us?
Yeah, so there's the 5 pillars. I really wanted to sort of take my opinion out of my book as much as possible, and really bring in a multidisciplinary approach where I say, let's say you pick a low protein diet. Why is that? Let's look at the epidemiological data, studies of large population. Well, a low protein diet, including our own study, but many studies are supporting a low protein diet, and almost no studies are supporting a high protein diet, right? So some studies will claim you have to have sufficient protein, but rarely you see a study showing a very high protein diet is beneficial in a large population in extending their lifespan or decreasing a disease. So that's one pillar. Another pillar is the clinical data, randomized. So, for example, fat, I just mentioned the study in Spain where they took thousands of people that were at risk for cardiovascular disease. They randomized them, and then they say, well, let's look at the ones that have a high-fat diet versus the one from these sources, from olive oil and nuts, versus those that have a low-fat diet. And the ones that they had to stop the study because the ones that had a high-fat, high olive oil nut diet, they did so much better than everybody else that it was unethical to continue. So that's the clinical trial data. Then basic data focused on longevity. Well, again, a diet could be very positive for a year or two, but what happens 30 years down the road, 40 years? And so it's very important to have at least mouse data, and in some cases now we have even monkeys data on longevity, and say, well, what happens when you have certain diet versus another diet? And for example, if you look at the data from monkeys, they are calorie restricted. If you took monkeys that were on a Western type diet, fairly bad diet, like could be a typical American diet, and then you restrict by 25%, you see tremendous effects on diabetes, cancer, cardiovascular disease. And by tremendous, I don't mean a 10% decrease. I mean a 50% to 100% decrease. So we now know that by just cutting the calories by 25%, not even changing the composition, you can have a tremendous effect on monkeys, not the mice. So that's another pillar. And then the fourth pillar is the centenarians. Look around the world. What about all these people that have record longevity? What do they have in common? And what they have in common is a low protein diet, good fats diet, rarely eat meat, or once in a while, but not very common. And again, once they get older, they may eat a little bit more, thanks to their sons and daughters sort of forcing them to do so. And then the fifth pillar is complex systems, which is, what about a car? What if you look at a car or a plane? How does that age? And what can we learn from something that we built and we know exactly how it's built and the way it ages? So, for example, I use the example of a car. The tires are getting worn out, but then you can change the tires, right? So you can spend a lot of time studying how the tires get worn out, and then somebody comes around and says, you're wasting your time. I found out a way to change it. And so this is where the fasting mimicking diet comes in, and our work in promoting both intracellular regeneration and cellular regeneration so that you essentially change the tires.
Well, we'll talk about that after the break. We're just going to take a quick break. We're talking today with Valter Longo, and he's the author of The Longevity Diet. So we'll be back shortly.
Opinions, options, answers. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
Take us on the go. It's even easier now. The Voice America Talk Radio Network has launched our mobile app for iPhone, Android, or BlackBerry. Visit the Apple iTunes App Store, BlackBerry App World, or Android Market to download the app powered by Aircast. It's free and no registration is necessary. In minutes, you could be enjoying your favorite Voice America Talk Radio host, no matter where you are, in the car, out and about, while traveling, or anytime you can't be close to your computer. Catch up on the archives you've missed or discover new shows on the spot. Search Voice America at your favorite app store.
What causes us to be sick? We're not talking about the actual illness or the scientific cause of illnesses. We're talking about your body and health. Listen for the healing whisper of return to peace. Each week, host Dr. Marianne Chase shows you how to listen to your heart to identify poor health, stress, and disease. You'll learn how to heal energetically and spiritually, as well as physically. It's time to depend less on the drugs and more on the heart. The Healing Whisper airs live every Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 a.m. Pacific on Voice America Health and Wellness.
Follow the Voice America Talk Radio Network on Twitter. We're at Voice America TRN. You'll get the latest fix on what's happening with our shows, this week's featured guests, and general happenings that you should know about at the Voice America Talk Radio Network. Now you don't have to miss anything when you're away from your home or office. Just go to twitter.com/Voice America TRN or follow along with us at Voice America TRN, the Voice America Talk Radio Network. We're on the cutting edge of social media. Can you keep up?
Opinions, options, answers. You're listening to Voice America Health and Wellness.
You are listening to Falling Through the Cracks with your host, Dr. Rebecca Risk. To reach the program today, please call in to 1-866-472-5792. Again, that's 1-866-472-5792. You may also send an email directly to Dr. Risk. The email address is anantacalgary@gmail.com. Now, back to Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Today we're speaking with Valter Longo, and we're discussing his book, The Longevity Diet. So in your book, you have certain rules that people should follow around food. What are those?
Well, some of the major rules are, for example, something coming out of Sachin Panda's lab and a few other labs. It's called time-restricted feeding. And this is about how many hours per day should you eat. And some people, and a lot of people eat for 14, 15 hours a day, as research has been shown. And instead, it's clear that we need to stick with about 12 hours a day, not much less, not much more. Why is that? Well, if you go to 15 to 16 hours a day, so if you start eating, let's say, at 8 a.m. and you end at midnight, usually that's associated with metabolic problems and also with sleep problems. Now, some people now are starting to do the opposite, are starting to fast for 16 hours a day. And that's also problematic. There are a number of studies now showing, for example, gallbladder formation and gallstone removal is associated with long fasting periods. So if every day you go you fast for 16 hours, that could be problematic. You might end up needing a gallbladder operation. Also, several studies now are showing breakfast skipping is associated with increased cardiovascular disease and increased overall mortality. And so, obviously, we don't know why that is. Is it the breakfast or is it something else that the people that skip breakfast do? But certainly, if you fast 16 hours a day, you're most likely going to skip breakfast, and that's it's got an association with something negative, and so that's probably not a good idea. So best to stick with 12 hours. The other rule that I go against is this idea of eating 5 times a day or even 6 times a day, having small meals. Everybody's heard this. And clearly, this doesn't work. We're now in the United States at 70% people are either overweight or obese. And this has been associated with this 5 to 6 time meals a day recommendation. So in the book, I talk about if you're overweight or you tend to gain weight, go to 2 meals a day plus a snack. So keep the 12 hours feeding state, but 2 meals, let's say breakfast and lunch or breakfast and dinner, and then have a snack for your third meal. And that's probably the best and safest way to go. And then, what I mentioned earlier, low protein up to age 65, then go to a moderate protein intake. That's another important rule. Nourishment, be nourished. A lot of people become vegan, and they go from one problem to the other. So they go from maybe, lots of meat, etc., which can promote certain diseases, to being malnourished, low proteins, low vitamins, maybe B12 deficient, maybe vitamin D deficient, maybe omega-3 deficient. And that's probably as bad as having a bad diet. So the nourishment is very important. Yeah, so those are some of the rules. And, of course, maintain a not only weight, normal weight, but also look at your abdominal circumference. It's very easy to measure, and maintain a normal waist circumference. And I showed the measurements in the book.
So, I'm glad that people are talking about the meal frequency, because it was about 10 years ago where I read about the snacking part not being great for our blood sugar and all that. And the only thing I changed was to go to 3 meals a day instead of the 5 everybody had been told to do for years. And I lost 10 pounds without changing anything else. And I also felt freer because I didn't have to eat all this food all the time. And, and when people are talking also about how we are as hunter and gatherers, if we just want to look at that, we didn't eat 5 to 6 times a day. We didn't even have that much food available. And I'm sure nobody has the time to do that. So I'm not sure where that advice came from. But I feel
well, those advices
better,
I think came from some studies that might have been done in a hospital, right? So if you feed somebody in a hospital, if you could actually, keep them in a hospital and feed them exactly the right amount, and everything is controlled, it may have some benefits, but that's not reality. And when you get out there, you can imagine somebody gets to 8 p.m., has only eaten twice, and now starts thinking, my doctor told me to eat 5 or 6 times, so I got to eat another 3 meals, and I would not be surprised if this happens all the time.
Well, there's that, and I think that that can also make us realize that not realize that we're eating too much. And that's where a lot of our problems have come in, is that our calories are too high. And when I have people change this habit of theirs, they always come back and say they're hungry. But really, when we count everything, it's just that they were eating too much. And their body just has to adjust to eating the right amount because it was trained to feel a certain way. And, once they get over that, they feel better and more energy, and of course not trapped by eating so often.
Yes, I think it's almost impossible if you eat 5 or 6 times a day to really realize what you're eating, how many calories you eat at every point. And also the stomach, I say when you eat the right foods, let's say lots of legumes and vegetables and a little bit of starches, you can feel the stomach, right? And the stomach sends signal. This is what bariatric surgery is based on. The stomach sends signal to the brain, I'm full. And if you have small meals, that signal never reaches the brain, at least not the fullness. And that's where you're probably always hungry. And so that's probably also contributing to this overeating behavior.
So you have a fasting mimicking diet to kind of cover what you said before, where we've got some problems with the 16-hour fast that everybody is doing now. So what is this diet?
Yeah, so the fasting mimicking diet is really the sort of end result of all the research I've done. I started with Roy Walford, who was one of the pioneers on calorie restriction at UCLA. But they were doing this chronic calorie restriction that I mentioned earlier, and it works for certain things, but then it may do damage in other ways. So the fasting mimicking diet is the result of that, and trying to address the problems. And so the idea is, if you do something for 5 days, on average, probably every 4 months for most North Americans. If you do 5 days every 4 months of this diet that is equivalent to fasting, would you get long-term benefits? And the data suggest yes. So this is a diet in which each ingredient is selected for its fasting mimicking properties. What does that mean? It means that when you fast, there are certain components, particularly amino acids and proteins and sugars, the signal to the body to become activated. And so if you remove certain ingredients, then the body is fooled into thinking it's not eating at all. And that's what a fasting mimicking diet is. You provide nourishment, provide calories, provide pleasure, meaning that you're now eating foods that you recognize as normal foods for you, but you get the benefits of fasting. So we tested this clinically, and in the clinical trial, we did the 3 monthly cycles in a row for 5 days, and then we tested the effects, and this had very strong effects on many disease risk factors in the people that had those in the high range. So this range from cholesterol, triglyceride, blood pressure, fasting glucose, systemic inflammation measured by C-reactive protein, IGF-1, which is a potential risk factor for cancer. So all of those in people that had high levels of them to begin with came back to lower level, and in many cases came back to the normal range and not the high risk range. So we think that this is powerful, and we believe that now there are thousands of doctors in the United States and Canada that are recommending this prolonged fasting mimicking diet, and we believe that it can be next to the pharmacological interventions, and hopefully doctors start going to these FMDs first, see how the patient does, and then they make a decision whether to put them on drugs or not.
So what would this look like if somebody decided to do this? Like, how often are they doing it, and how long for?
Yeah, so the recommendation is, well, first of all, I recommend that the people use what was tested clinically. I don't make a penny out of it. Everything goes to the foundation called Create Cures Foundation. And but we felt that it was important to standardize it so that is safer and effective for people. And this if somebody is obese and has a couple of risk factors, say high cholesterol, high blood pressure, the recommendation is to do it once a month for 5 days. If somebody is on the other side and is perfect weight, has a pescatarian diet, is very healthy, exercises a lot, this person might have to do it twice a year.
Okay, and what does that 5 days look like?
The 5 day it has lots of nut bars, vegetable soups, lots of good fats, and a number of other ingredients. I think it's got about 66 ingredients. And this, we make it look like normal food, but in fact, every single ingredient, it took years of developing and making sure that it had fasting mimicking properties. And so it's fairly sophisticated, but to most people it looks fairly straightforward. And I think over 35,000 people have done it now, and most people can get through it without much problems.
So is there a restriction on calories? Like if we're not really fasting, but fasting, you say, or are we eating the same amount of calories, just choosing different food?
No, the calories are reduced. So some of the properties of fasting mimicking properties you get from less calorie, but on day 1, for example, you have 1,100 calories. So it's fairly high. And on day 2 to 5, you have about 800 calories. So it certainly uses the calorie restriction for 5 days, but that's maybe part of the effect, and the major part is the composition of the diet.
Okay, so now, is there any way people can get more information if they're wanting to look at doing this for themselves?
Yeah, so of course the book is all about that, the longevity diet. And then, also the book, all my royalties go to the Create Cures Foundation. And they can go to prolonfmd.com, PROLON FMD .com, and they can look up the prolonged diet and see how. I'm not sure. I mean, the United States is available. I think it's also available in Canada now, but I'm not sure.
It looks like it's available on Amazon.ca, and it might be available in other stores. I want to thank you so much, though, for joining me today. This was a very informative episode.
Okay, thank you.
I want to thank everybody for listening today. Just be sure to make today a great day.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's edition of Falling Through the Cracks. Feel alive and thrive. Please join Dr. Rebecca Risk again next Monday at noon Eastern Time and 9 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Health and Wellness channel. We'll talk more next week.